Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next of our healing conversations. I'm Rachel Singleton, and I'm here with my good friend Ian Watson. And today we want to talk about insight. We feel, for both of us, this is at the core of our work. It's the core of our understanding of how healing works. And what we're really talking about is consciousness itself. What that is, what that means, what it means to be a conscious, energetic being in an energetic universe, and how an understanding of that can help us to navigate life. I know that I so often hear people say, I don't know whether I can trust my thoughts. I don't know if I can trust my feelings. And there's a sense of not quite knowing what it is inside us that we can listen to or should listen to. And that in itself can cause a lot of stress. So what's wisdom? What's consciousness? What's insight? This is something that we're going to start to explore today. I think that this might be more than one conversation. And this is also a real area of speciality for you, Ian. I know it's your work with the three principles in particular, but also the very trajectory of your work over many, many years has been really bringing you to a point where you've come to understand this is absolutely crucial. So I'm going to hand it over to you and get you to give us some of the background on that, and then we can unpick this further.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, consciousness transformation has been essentially the core of my work all the way through. From going back to when I was working with homeopathy and essences, which that was my work for about 15 years, as you know. And then that led me into a deeper exploration of what was going on for people psychologically and emotionally, because I saw that was primarily what people were struggling with. You know, even people who presented with a physical complaint, there was also something else behind that, which came into the conversation at some point. And there was a few things that I noticed over the time that I worked with, a lot of people over a period of years, which I started to pay more and more attention to. One was the fact that I had by this time a toolbox full of techniques to help people, things that I'd trained in, things that I'd learned. And what I noticed was that they could be super helpful with one person on one occasion. And then someone else who seemed to be struggling in a similar way, I could have them do the same process, same technique, and it wasn't helpful at all. And that bugged me, first of all. It's like, does this stuff work or does it not work? Because it seemed to work last week, And then even with the same person on different occasion, they'd come back with a different challenge or, a different issue or something. And what had helped them previously wasn't so helpful anymore. It was diminishing returns. It just seemed like we'd have to work harder to get not so much of a result. So that was puzzling to me. Equally puzzling was the fact that some people would come in and we'd have a good connection. There'd be a good rapport, a good sense of trust in the relationship. And we'd have a conversation which seemed to me like it's just a kind of spontaneous conversation that sometimes happen. When you find you meet someone at a certain place and it feels like a timely meeting, and there's just an openness, to exploring things. And sometimes it would feel to me like we hadn't really gotten started with the consultation proper. And lo and behold, the person would say, "Oh, well, that was great, Ian. Thank you very much. I'm good to go." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, how could you possibly be good to go?" And they say, "Well, I don't know, it's just something in this conversation. It's just helped clear things up for me. I can see it looks different now. I feel differently about it." And I could tell that they weren't making that up. You can feel it when someone they come in feeling a bit burdened or troubled and they leave looking and feeling lighter. You can see that something has lifted. And I had that experience as well, not just with one person, but with numerous people, where they would spontaneously realize something for themselves that clearly helped them more than anything that I had in mind.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't even got around to doing the technique yet or something like that. So that was also really intriguing to me. It's like, what's going on there? That sometimes I'm working really hard and getting very poor results. Other times it felt like I wasn't working at all. I was just, just forming a connection with the person, getting to know them. And yet something happened in that conversation where, which seemed to enable them to see something fresh. And that was really all they needed. So, and I'm sure you've had similar parallel experience to mine, both kinds of those experiences. I think anybody who works in the healing arts for long enough will see a variation on what I've just described. It doesn't matter what modalities a person is using. So it was only when in beginning of 2011 when I came to the understanding known as the three principles and was introduced to the work of Sid Banks, which I'd not heard of or come across up until that point. And I heard him talk about insight and the fact that what he was sharing, he said, could only be realized through personal insight. It wasn't an informational kind of learning. He said that, he was confident in saying that because for him, what had happened to him as a personal transformation, which was very powerful, had only happened via his own insight. He said it didn't come through training or technique or any of that thing of that kind because he hadn't done any of that. So to his credit, he kind of realized, well, what happened was something literally just shifted inside of him and he saw life through different eyes. So he had this terrific series, not just a single realization, but this terrific series of realizations that gave him a whole new perspective on life. And it transformed the way that he was in the world. He went from being someone who was very shy, very insecure, awkward socially, to being someone who was confident, was speaking with great authority about quite deep matters of the human mind, things that he'd had no training in. And yet he was speaking from this place of great understanding and depth and wisdom. So when he talked about insight in that way, I had an insight about that. I realized immediately, I thought, oh my God, that explains to me what was going on for the clients that I was working with in both categories. So I suddenly realized, well, the ones that I worked with that didn't seem to get help, and I thought it was the technique wasn't the right technique, or, we hadn't done it enough or something like that. I suddenly realized, well, all that happened really was they didn't have an insight that enabled them to shift in that fundamental way. Whereas the other people who sometimes got tremendously helped, even when we hadn't done any techniques, in spite of any treatment that I was offering, what I saw was they'd had their own insight. That's all that had happened. And then I realized that's all that ever needs to happen. So I suddenly, it just opened up this whole area for me of something which it had already been happening in my work, in my life, but I hadn't understood it before. And I hadn't understood the relevance and the importance of it. I suddenly saw that insight is really the sole agent of personal change. And by which I mean that if someone's looking to feel differently in a certain area in their life, if they're looking to have a different experience in a relationship, in a work situation, if something is troubling them and they're trying to find a solution to it, if someone's struggling with a habit or a behavior or an addiction even, and they're trying to use willpower to throw it off and it's not working, all of those categories and more, all that person needs is an insight. That's all. And as soon as they have an insight of sufficient depth, it literally shifts their consciousness to a new level. And it also has the effect of shifting their well-being or their experience of their well-being to a new level. They suddenly find themselves operating from it's like a new vantage point where a lot of things that were bothering them simply no longer bother them. They're no longer an issue in their life.
Yeah.
And if you ask them about it, they'll say, "What? Oh, yeah, I suppose I was depressed, wasn't I?" It's almost like they have to think hard to remember what they were like before, because they're not there anymore. And it doesn't even occur to them to dwell on how they used to be.
There's so much in there. That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. I love hearing you speak about this. one of the things that I kind of just want to, well, there's a few things I want to pick up on, but especially coming back to Sid Banks for a moment, because he was a Glaswegian. He was like, he was a welder,
He's
wasn't
from
he?
Edinburgh, actually, so we better get that right.
All right. Oh, okay.
He grew up in Leith, just outside Edinburgh.
Okay. Okay. And he just had no spiritual upbringing or interest or anything like that. And you know, there's something about that, just the ordinariness of his life, you know, beforehand. And then this point where someone said to him, you know, you're not an insecure person, you're having insecure thoughts.
Yeah.
And him seeing the truth of that, him suddenly seeing what that meant, that meant he wasn't insecure. The thoughts coming through were insecure thoughts. That's two different things. And he was able to see that in that moment, and a space opened up between him and his thinking. And just as you described, you know, my experience, both for myself and with other people, is that when they have an insight and they see that a way of being or a behavior or belief or whatever it might be that they've been caught in is not working for them at the simplest level, it's just not working out for them, it's working against them. When they see that as something, rather than feeling that it's who they are, when they start to realize that that's not their essential nature, then again, that sense of breathing space, that sense of distance, that sense of coming back to yourself and seeing your life in a different way is so profound that it just does the work for you.
That's right.
And there's something about that that is just so simple, so beautiful, and so transformative.
It is. And what I find so hopeful about this is the realization that Sid Banks had, first of all, was a personal one. You know, it was applicable to him in his own experience, his own lived experience. So he realized something that transformed his experience from one of insecurity to one of ease and peace and confidence. And that then gave him access to wisdom that, you know, that was way beyond anything that he'd studied or learned in books and so on and so forth. But then looking out from that new vantage point, he then realized that the insight that he'd had wasn't just personal to him. He saw that, you know, what he saw was, oh, something had been revealed to him that was applicable to everybody, no matter what feeling state that they were in, no matter what they were up against, no matter what flavor of trouble or strife they were struggling with. He realized, oh, this doesn't just apply to me personally and to the feeling of insecurity. The next thing he kind of saw very quickly was all feelings are created through this power of thought. All feelings for all people, no exceptions. He saw the principled nature of it. He saw that, oh, what, this is just a fundamental fact of the human experience. And once he saw that, then he had something that obviously he wanted to share. He wanted people to see that for themselves. And to his great credit, he realized that it wasn't anything that he could teach to other people. He couldn't give it to them. Because he saw that the only thing that had transformed him was realization. See, you know, he used the word insight, I think, very deliberately. He said it's a seeing from within, a sight from within. It has to come from inside you. And he realized that the only way that he could really share the understanding that he'd gained in a way that was helpful to other people was to somehow facilitate them having their own insight. And that was, you know, a big part of his kind of learning journey was like, well, how the hell do you do that? right? He hadn't any training in that, but at least he had enough kind of awareness to know that that's what was needed. Which I think was remarkable that he saw that, because it's so tempting when, I mean, there's a long history of people having mystical experiences which transform them, visibly from the inside out, who then really struggle to put that across to people around them. People notice, it's like, oh my God, look, something's happened to this guy. He's woken up. He's a completely different person. And then it's like, well, spill the beans, tell us what happened so that we can enjoy the benefits. And of course, when a person tries to do that, it turns into something that it wasn't. It becomes a description of an experience rather than the experience itself. And that doesn't help people. So Sid Banks realized that quite quickly. He could tell people about what happened to him, but it didn't mean that the same thing happened to them. So he started to get interested in, well, what are the conditions that are conducive to people having their own insight? And that became a kind of ongoing exploration. And essentially, we already know, without having learned it, we already know from our own experience what the conditions are that are conducive to insight. I give people like silly practical examples of that, such as I ask people, have you ever lost your keys or your passport or your wallet? And what do you do initially when you first realize that it's gone missing? You probably do something similar to what I do. Is like, oh my God, where is it? I go into my head and I start running around trying to remember, trying to figure it out. So we go into the intellectual function, first of all, the rational mind, and it often fails to come up with an answer. Usually, I mean, it could literally be in front of our nose, but if we get too busy up here, things become invisible, even when they're in front of our nose. And then at a certain point, if you get distracted or you don't have time to deal with it and you say, okay, I'm just going to leave it alone for now. And you go off and you make yourself a cup of tea or something like that. As soon as your mind settles down, what happens? In that space, suddenly you get an image of where you left it. Or you spontaneously find yourself putting your hand in a drawer, in a coat pocket, or, oh my God, there it is. And it happened when you weren't thinking about it. Right? And I call that the insight space, which is the name of my business, is that there's a space that gets created within which it seems that it's more conducive towards insight. There's no guarantee. It's not like an insight on demand button that we can press, but it seems that that's just the way the mind works, and it seems to work the same way for everybody. When our mind is more relaxed and open, it's a lot easier and more likely that we'll have a fresh thought, which is what an insight is. It's a new perspective. Yeah. Where our mind is super busy and it's already full of what we already know, we can still have insight, but there's not so much room for it. We're not so available to insight when we're busy minded. And that's the paradox, because whenever we're up against something in life, if someone develops a health problem, or they discover they're in dire straits all of a sudden, or one of their kids has just gotten sick or done something crazy, what do? We go straight into our heads and we start overthinking it. And actually, that's these are the moments when what we really need to do is to tap into that deeper wisdom and let it come to us. Whatever response is actually needed is much more likely to come to us in that space of insight than it is when we kind of running around, like headless chickens. So we forget that, even though we know it through those everyday examples, we forget that that's how insight works. It works for everybody. It works the same. It doesn't matter what you're up against in the outside world. You're more likely to find a creative solution if you relax around it and essentially don't have much thinking about it. And people say, well, that's impossible, Ian. I've just been diagnosed with X. How can I not think about it? And I know that that's what it looks like. It looks like a compulsion, but we've got to kind of see that it's simply not helpful. And that there is that other mode that's always available to us, even in the midst of difficult circumstances, whereby we can drop out of our busy-mindedness and we can momentarily drop into a more peaceful place inside. And then we can suddenly find resources that we didn't know we had.
Mm.
You know, it's happening to people all the time, even people who've never heard about these three principles.
Mm.
All the three principles understanding does it helps to give us a context for that.
Mm.
That's what it did for me. It helped me to make sense of what had already been happening throughout my whole life.
Mm.
That's really helpful.
It's incredibly helpful. And as you've been saying that, those last few things in particular, you know, pointing to that space, that other mode that we can drop into. I'm wondering how many people, as they listen to this, can feel that.
Mm.
You know, so often when we speak about this and speak from that space, it has a resonance for people. You
That's
know,
true.
they can actually drop into it.
Yeah.
And there's this, you know, for me, I know that whenever I talk about this space, or if I'm kind of working with that with somebody, or listening to you speak about that just now, there's always, what comes with that is a sense of relief. It's a sense of like, oh yeah, I can drop all that stuff. I can just come back and settle in. It's a sense of coming home. And I think that recognizing that is really helpful. Recognizing the actual tangible feel of ease, of well-being. I was listening to something on YouTube the other day with Dickon Bettinger. Someone was interviewing him about an aspect of the three principles. And he was saying, you know, 90% of what we think is just like, we don't need to bother with it. 90% of the stuff that's coming through, we just don't need to bother with it. We can let it go. It can come in and we can let it go. And I really laughed when I heard that. And I thought, yeah, you know, we don't realize just how much time we spend in our heads, in overthinking. And that when we're doing that, we're in the other mode. It shuts us off to that clear space inside, to that deep self. In my work, I call it the deep self. Yeah. That sense of coming and settling back into yourself, feeling what your knowing is telling you. And time after time, and I know it's the same for you, when we're sitting with someone in a session and someone comes into that and just takes a moment just to breathe and to just say, okay, all that stuff's going on. We've got that story. We've got this situation. Putting that to one side for a moment and just coming inside, just being and just breathing. Is there another aspect of ourselves? Is there another place in ourselves that we can access here? Can we slip into that deep being and see how it looks from there? Just out of curiosity.
That's it.
No pressure. Just let's see how it looks from there. Let's see what comes.
Such a beautiful way of putting it, because when you say it like that, Rachel, what I hear is it's an invitation, which is how it looks to me as well. It's an invitation. We can't force anybody to settle down and quieten down, but we can invite them into that space. And if we ourselves are resting in that place as best we can, then it's a genuine invitation. We're basically saying, look, I get that you're struggling, and I know that it's difficult. It's nicer over here.
Yeah.
Would you like to stay there, or would you like to come and hang out here for a little while? You know, it's nicer over here, and I think people recognize, you know, if they're open to that possibility, they recognize that. Oh, yeah, of course, I'd rather be there. Of course, because they know they would. They know everybody longs to feel better when they're struggling on the inside. It's what we're all looking for when we distract ourselves in 1,000,001 ways. We're just looking to feel better on the inside. And this one, it offers that possibility. You know, it helps people to see that that's available now. You don't have to wait until your circumstances have changed or anything. Nothing needs to change, because it's within us at all times, under all circumstances, right in the midst of a diagnosis or a health problem or a crisis. It never goes anywhere.
And there's such an ease and permission and relaxation about it, this sense that almost a feeling of, something's got your back. There's this wisdom here for you,
Yeah.
that whatever appears to be unfolding on the surface in the outside world does not impact this. And that remaining in this space allows you to be with what's unfolding in a very different way.
That's right.
You can shift up and get caught up in it and spin with it, but you can also be here and flow with it. And things can still be challenging, and difficult things can still happen, but they look and feel different from this space.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because all the thinking and the overthinking around them, you recognize as thinking and overthinking.
Yeah.
You recognize your scripts and your stories getting triggered. You recognize the panic coming through, and it's like, oh, there's panic. And inside, there's this clarity, there's this space. You can watch it, you can be with it. The last conversation that we had was around returning signs of well-being. And all of those things that we pointed towards then are symptomatic of coming back to this space.
That's right.
All those good things, all of the knots that untangle and the way that things release in your body, in your mind, are symptomatic of you coming back into this space. And this space nurtures, and this space provides answers, and this space guides, and it's gentle, and it's inclusive, and it's loving, and it's truthful. And yeah, like you said, it feels better to be here.
That's it. And that was one of the things that Sydney Banks quickly realized was that, and he said it in, the same thing in a lot of different ways. He said that it's in the feeling. He would preface his talks by saying, don't listen to my words, listen for a feeling within yourself. That's how he was, in his best way that he could. He was trying to help people to recognize what he himself knew from his own experience. The only way that he could really convey that was it's in the feeling. Because he knew that was true in his own experience. He'd been elevated to a place of well-being that he hadn't experienced before in his life. And it's like, my God, who wouldn't want to be here rather than where I was before? It was like a no-brainer. He knew that anybody who saw that it was available to them would want to move in that direction. Anybody, particularly someone who's been struggling and suffering. And which is pretty much all of us, right, to varying degrees.
But when we start to get a feeling of when we're moving in the direction of struggling and suffering, we also can start to get an eye for when we're moving in the direction of well-being and ease.
That's it.
And
that's
then
the practicality of this.
Then it starts to be something that's more choiceful. We're more aware. We feel we have some direction around things.
That's it. That's beautiful. That's what we call the understanding does for us. It gives us a kind of gauge or yardstick in terms of what, as you said, what direction are we moving in, and it gives us a really, I think, a healthy and helpful relationship to our feeling states, so that rather than having it be that what we might call stressful feelings, rather than having them in our mind as being a problem, something that we don't want to experience, no, they become really good feedback. So if I'm feeling tight and tense and upset and frightened and anxious and worried, and whatever your flavor of that might be, we've all got our own flavor that we tend to go to. When those feelings arise now, rather than it's like, oh God, how do I get rid of that? How do I turn it into something positive? Or how do I distract myself from it, make it go away, or just numb it? I don't need to do any of that. If I understand that all that feeling is indicating is that I'm entertaining some insecure thought. And I'm not seeing it as thought. I'm thinking it's a reality. That's all that's happening. But that's great to know. Because
Yeah.
if I know that, if I understand that it's just thought, and I know that it's got nothing to do with the truth of who I am on the inside, then I can learn to ignore those thoughts that are not helpful, knowing that they're temporary, they're transient, and knowing that if I leave them alone, they'll leave me alone.
Nicely put. Yeah.
Whereas if I get
Yeah.
involved in trying to do something with them, they're not going to leave me alone. They're going to
Yeah.
hang around and keep bothering me
Yeah.
because of all the
Yeah.
attention that I'm giving to them.
Yeah.
So it's very practical, this understanding.
It's incredibly practical. Yeah.
But not in the way of a tool or a technique. It's not something that we have to remember how do I apply it, It's not like that. It's just that it gives us a deep understanding and appreciation for how the psychological and spiritual side of our nature is made to work together.
Yeah.
And what it reveals to us is that there's, as you said, there's always that deep wellspring of ease and well-being and peace and wisdom. Is always available to us. This is our true nature. It never goes anywhere. It can't be lost, it can't be diminished or even damaged in any way. And yet it can be obscured from our experience because of the nature of thought. The way that thought creates our felt experience makes it look as though we've lost it, makes it look as though it's gone away. But it's just an illusion. It hasn't really gone anywhere. When we understand,
and makes it look as though something on the outside is doing this to us, or
exactly,
making us feel bad, making us feel angry, making us feel whatever.
It looks like that to all of us because most of the thought that's arising in our consciousness is invisible to us.
I was just about to say that. Yeah,
we don't get to see the thought content, thank God. It's probably a blessing that we don't. But that all of that thought that's passing through is giving rise to shifts and changes in our feelings and our moods. So we're experiencing thought even though we don't see that as thought. So the fact that thought's invisible, you're exactly right. That means that we associate how we're feeling with whatever's going on in our life on the outside. But it's false association.
So one of the things that I often hear people saying or getting into around this is, right, well, if my thoughts create my reality, then I need to be, how do I change my thoughts? How do I do that? And then immediately what's happened there? That person has gone into thinking.
Right.
So they've gone into thinking about what they need to do, how they need to control this, how they need to make this work. And with that will come a sense of pressure and stress and tension. Yeah. And that is the indicator that you don't need to follow those thoughts, that you don't need to go there. And if you follow the thread of that in your life, all those other times when you start to get anxious and think you need to control something and think you need to change something and think you need to do something, then just starting to look at that and observe that and notice when you're getting stressed and tense and pressured, and then consider, are those thoughts that you maybe don't need to be following either? Are these the 90% thoughts that Dick and Bettinger talks about that we can let go of?
Right.
That we can actually just stay in a place of ease, that we are allowed to, that we have permission to be in ease and flow and peace, and we don't have to go into tension.
That's right. It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement. And I think that is revolutionary. And again, one of the things that people sometimes come back with is, well, that doesn't feel very responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like I should be, I need to think about these critical thoughts about myself, otherwise I won't improve. I need to work on myself because I've got stuff and wounds and whatever. And I need to be thinking about such and such. And again, same thing's happening. We're going into our heads around something.
Yeah.
And we're forgetting that we can trust our essential nature to recognize what's true and what needs our attention.
Yeah.
And that we will do what we need.
That's right. Another common version of that I hear regularly from people who are working in the business world, for example. When they hear me share this understanding, their first response to it was like, God, if I was as chilled as you, I'd never get anything done here. I'd say, well, explain that to me. And what they're essentially saying is like, I need that adrenaline. I need that, I need that being on the edge of, you know, being stressed, basically, is what they're
mm,
saying. I need
mm,
to feel
mm,
stressed because that's what drives me to get through my day and get my work done.
mm,
And, what they haven't yet seen is that actually from a place of ease, you become way more efficient. You don't become lazy. I haven't seen
mm,
anybody that became lazy and inefficient through this
mm,
understanding.
mm,
On the contrary, people get way more productive because
mm.
you take all the noise out of the system.
Yeah,
All the should, all the have to, all the self-criticism, all the judgment, all the pressure on yourself.
yeah,
You take all of
yeah.
that out of the equation, people just wake up and they do what's in front of them, they get it done. And then
Beautiful,
they
beautiful.
get on with
Yeah.
the next thing because they're in the present.
And so something of what they're doing, some of those things that are unnecessarily stressful may well fall away as well.
Yeah.
That there may well be things that just naturally do not resonate
Exactly.
in that space of ease.
They didn't need to be doing that in the first place.
They never needed it. They never needed to put that pressure on themselves or have those deadlines or have whatever it was.
Yeah. Again, that has to be
The
realized.
wisdom, exactly, that the wisdom reasserts itself and helps you to see things differently.
Yeah. So you
And
can have a good friend telling you a million times, ease off. You don't need to work so hard.
Yeah.
You can't hear it.
Yeah.
But when you're in that frame of mind, it looks like a necessity and a requirement. It doesn't look like you've got an option. As soon as your consciousness shifts through insight, now what your friend was advising you makes perfect sense. You don't need that advice anymore because you see it for yourself.
Yeah.
Oh God, why am I doing this to myself?
Right? Yeah.
People suddenly wake up to how hard they've been on themselves and it doesn't make sense anymore. So they stop.
Yeah.
That's how behavior changes through insightful understanding.
No technique needed.
No technique needed. I've known people who've quit smoking after several decades of failed attempts. Single insight like that. Their level of well-being gets elevated. And at this level, it doesn't make sense to do that to their body. It did at that level, but not this level. It just doesn't make sense. They try it and it tastes horrible. Right? The thing that is really interesting in the field of addiction, because the things that people use to feel better, and we all have the stuff that we do to try and feel better, right? There's for that. So to me, addiction, my definition of addiction is not just to do with alcohol and drugs and so on. It's anything that we do to try to feel better. That we think that we need to do that in order to feel better, that could form the basis of an addictive pattern of behavior for any of us. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be jogging. People get addicted to jogging because they believe that if I don't get out and have my run, I'm fit to be tied. So it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Now, when a person sees that their well-being is pre-existing, it's not dependent on anything. It's not conditional on doing or not doing anything. It's something that we can fall into whenever we're not preoccupied with a busy mind. Right there, it's just waiting to rise to the surface and be experienced. If a person realizes that and they start to live more in alignment with their well-being, to do that same behavior that they were doing to feel better just doesn't make sense, because when they do it now, they probably feel worse. Right? The thing that used to take them up takes them down now. So it literally just falls away without any effort.
And just to be clear there for people who are listening, that it's not that the running is wrong. It's like someone may still find that they naturally want to go out running.
Absolutely.
But that what's stopped is the sense of compulsion and pressure behind that. The compulsiveness is going, and instead it's just the natural thing to do next. It's what feels good to their body today. And on another day, if they don't need to do that because that's not what is right for their body, then they won't do that. So suddenly there's this sense of, rather than having to do something, of that coming from the outside in, it's a decision that's made from the inside out.
Yeah, that's
in the living moment.
So glad you mentioned that, because it's a really crucial point that it's easy to miss. But you're absolutely spot on there. And it's not even a decision, then it just becomes a joyful expression of what you feel like doing.
Exactly.
And when it no longer feels enjoyable and nourishing, you stop doing it. You know, you do something different.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Yeah.
That urge, that need, that drive, that compulsion, all of that can fall away. And then it becomes really clear what's good medicine for us, what's good for us in any particular
Yeah.
moment. And it's
Yeah.
dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the
Yeah.
same for everybody, and it's not the same for one person on different days of the week even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So someone might see that person going out running every day and think nothing's changed, but that person is doing it from a completely different place inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, there's so much that we've covered here, and this has already been quite a long one. So I think should we hit the
Wrap it
pause
up.
button for this one, and then we can see what we feel like we need to come back to, and if people want to comment on that and ask us, then that would be great. But I think this is a lovely introduction to understanding the gift of consciousness.
Yeah,
And
power of
how
insight.
power of insight. Yeah.
To me, that's it's something that just constantly amazes me to see that a single insight. I mean, Sid Banks, he used the expression. He said, "You're one thought away from whatever it is that you've been seeking in your entire life. You're only ever one thought away."
That's a good note to end on.
That's it. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Ian.
Always a pleasure. We'll see you again next time.